Hello, my delicious darlings. Today's episode is a very special one because it marks 1 full year since the inception of the channel. Thank you so much for spending the last year with me. It has been an honor and a pleasure to share stories and rhymes from around the universe with you. Today, we are taking a break from spooky Halloween poems. Instead, I am going to tell you the story of a young girl getting to know an unusual new environment and how she encounters the magic that will change the rest of her life. The story is both spooky and sad, and you might even recognize the girl's name. Enjoy. Chapter 1. The girl's name was Seraphina, but her mother's friends called her Sarah. Sarah's mother had a lot of friends. Not old friends. That was the name they used for the men who came to visit Sarah's mother and her colleagues in the evenings. The men who drank gin at the bar and made payments that kept the lights on and everything running. Sarah's mother was called Lenny, and her true companions were the other women at the brothel. The 21 women working in the tall stone building on the main Nürnberg road did not have an easy life. But when they had the chance to, they formed a determinedly merry band. Tonight was a special night, and Sarah, in her best holly green dress, was fairly buzzing with excitement. She was wearing pearls. Her mother's, the only thing she had been able to take with her when they'd flown their former home. And a red velvet ribbon circled her throat. Behind her, the main parlor was decked and ready for the celebration of Christmas. Right now, Sarah was sitting on the faded window seat in the front parlor of the brothel, peering out through the layer of frost at the almost deserted street beyond her. It was dark this evening despite the early hour, and a low mist clung to the walls and windows of the buildings opposite. Here and there, expensive candlelight flickered at ice-rimmed windows. Sarah thought she saw a man watching from across the muddy road. He was hard to make out, swathed head to toe in a cloak that was not quite black but seemed to shine with thread of silver. She wondered if he was a nobleman who had come here seeking entertainment, only now realizing that the women who worked the street were taking their one brief holiday of the year. If so, he was not pleased by the knowledge, for there was something almost threatening in his stance. And his head was tilted forwards, as though to fix on something that irked him. In fact, Sarah mused as she caught the shine of pale eyes beneath the heavy hood. She could almost have believed that the stranger was looking at her. She must have been wrong, however, because a moment later he'd vanished as if he had never been. Shrugging, Sarah turned back into the parlor. Most of the time Sarah liked the liveliness of the brothel, the eager conversations, the chattering and laughter. The other sounds sometimes disturbed her, but when they did she would run out into the garden behind the building and stare up at the peaceful stars. On occasion Sarah still missed her old home and the peaceful luxury she had known in her early years. Unfortunately, there was no easy solution for that. Sarah still didn't know what her father's name had been. She knew that he had been rich and handsome. He'd been an artist, at least when he hadn't been working for her grandfather, and he had covered Sarah's bedroom wall with the most exquisite murals. Sarah had always known that her father had another wife somewhere in town, a wife who was never to know about their existence. That was why they could never go riding with her father in his fine carriage, and why Sarah could not go to school with the daughters of the noble families. That had been a deep blow to Sarah because she dearly loved to learn. Lenny had taught Sarah her letters and numbers. She had promised Sarah that when she turned 12, her father would hire a tutor for her. She would be as beautiful and accomplished as any noble lady, and one day she would have a protector just as fine as Lenny's. Apparently, many men had second families, because their rich parents forced them to marry women they didn't love, and in some cases didn't even like. The only way for many men to have a true family was to hide them away, like a secret, a treasure as precious as a dragon's hoard. Paradise. Lenny had called their townhouse in the richest part of Nürnberg Eden. It had been as beautiful as the first garden that sheltered Eve and Adam, with pale blue walls overlaid with crawling ivy, a flowering garden in the rear, and every inside wall painted with another perfectly executed landscape. There was even a brass nameplate on the front door that read Eden House. In those days, Sarah had been exquisitely happy. She'd had everything she needed, and devoutly believed that her father was the most wonderful man in the world. She had believed that until a night when she was 8 years old, when she had been woken by the sound of her parents arguing. Sarah didn't know what the argument had been about, or why the man who had always cherished her and called her Liebchen and his little treasure had suddenly turned cruel. But she well remembered him dragging her out of her room and casting her and Lenny out into the night. Sarah had cried when they'd first come to the brothel. She hadn't liked it, the noise, the smells, the odor of the kitchens, and the stale smell of alcohol. She hadn't understood why they couldn't go back to their pretty little house, or why she had been forced to leave all of her treasures behind. Sarah had spent the first week nearly insensible, sobbing into her crossed arms and refusing to speak. Even when Danik, the man who managed the women at the brothel, had lost his temper and struck her, Sarah had only clutched her bruised and swelling cheek and continued to weep in silence. That night, Lenny had sat Sarah down and explained to her the harsh realities of their world. Men liked women. That was not news to Sarah, but Lenny told her now that many of them were not interested in love or closeness. A lot of them, in fact, cared only for youth, beauty, and the thrill of firm, fair flesh. Sarah's father might have loved them both to begin with. He had certainly told Lenny so, and his promises had been many and wonderful. But his desire for Lenny had eventually faded, and he had begun to resent the expense of supporting his second family. On that last night, he and Lenny had quarreled because Sarah's father had announced that he had a new paramour, and that she would be moving into Eden the next morning. "The men who come here don't want wives or children," Lenny had said. "What do they want, then?" In a few brief, harsh words, Lenny had described what men had sought from women ever since the dawn of time. The word for the act is sex, Lenny had concluded. Men come here for that. With me or with the other women. They pay for it. They stay for an hour, maybe for a night. And they walk away and forget us. And that's what a brothel means. A brothel, yes. A place where men can buy. That? Sarah asked. Yes. Sarah had frowned, rocking back and forth and gnawing on her knuckle. But why would we come to a place like this? Can't we go home to father? Lenny's beautiful face had twisted into a bitter smile. Your father doesn't want us. He has found a younger, prettier mistress. Our home is her home now, and our treasures belong to her. That is not fair, Sarah had wailed. Lenny had shaken her head sadly. The world is not fair. I'd hoped you wouldn't have to learn that just yet, but it is the truth. Sarah had let out a soft sob, but muffled it with her fist. I need to make a way for us now, Lenny had explained. I must work to win us food and shelter. Sadly, I am not strong. My mother was poor. Hunger and mistreatment made me weak. Fortunately, your father liked that I was delicate. I was better in Eden, but most of that was due to warmth and good food. I'm still not well enough to work as a maid or mill worker. A day in the fields would kill me, and I am old enough now that no fine man wants me for his mistress. Her sigh had been as fathomless as the ocean. We have nowhere else to go, my Fina, and no one to help us. I have to earn money, and at least here they won't ask me to sell you to the customers, too. Sarah's mouth had dropped open at that last sentence. People asked. Don't worry, Lenny's voice had been grim. I would slit their throats before I let that happen. Sarah had launched herself at her mother then, squeezing her tightly. She'd made a promise to herself that one day she would make her mother a lady. She would see her warm and secure and happy. She hadn't known yet how she would accomplish that. But if men had built cities and cathedrals from stone and sand, there had to be a way a girl ejected from Eden could build a life for the people she loved. Chapter 2. In ways, the brothel had turned out to be just as bad as Sarah had feared. In others, quite to her surprise, she had grown to like it. The other women, who could easily have resented the childish interloper in their midst, had become Sarah's friends, her defenders, her surrogate aunts. It was the women who had dressed Sarah tonight, even dabbing a little of their precious rose water on her throat. It was they who had charmed one of their suitors into cutting and delivering the beautiful pine tree that sat, brave in ribbons and paper chains, in the corner of the room. They had also pooled their little savings to purchase the small gifts waiting for each person on their plate at the table. The ladies were upstairs now dressing. When they were ready, they would descend the steps one after another, their best dresses dusted down and their hair tied in complicated ribbon-decked braids. For once, their faces would be free of cosmetics, wrinkles visible but laughter lines and dimples showing themselves as well. They would be laughing and joking, any former resentments forgotten, ready to scatter holly on a table that was already set for dinner, and light the berry-scented candles they had saved to buy. Christmas Eve and Christmas Day were Sarah's favorite days in the year because on those days Lenny and her friends were treated like anyone else. On those 2 days, the women forgot about customers and loan payments and whether they would be able to gather enough money the next time one of them needed a doctor. On Christmas Eve, even here in the brothel, anything was possible. Which was why, despite the locked door, Sarah was not overly surprised to find that a strange cloaked man had appeared in the drawing room behind her. Chapter 3. Sarah blinked at the man. She looked from the window, dressed with holly but still locked tight, to the main door, still locked and barred. The rear garden could only be accessed from within the building, and she could tell that the back door was closed by the absence of the chill draft that whipped through the building whenever it was propped open. Still, however he'd got there, his presence was undeniable, and Sarah knew better than to cheek a guest. Remembering her company manners, Sarah sketched a pretty curtsy. "Good evening, sir," she greeted the stranger. The man's head angled towards her. Despite the unusually bright light in the sitting room, it did not pierce the shadow of the stranger's hood. She could see the rest of the newcomer's body with complete clarity, from his fine shoes to the small, pale hairs that crowned his knuckles. But where his face should have been, there was only utter blackness. The impenetrable blackness unnerved Sarah, but she determinedly hid her reaction and pasted a smile onto her face. "I'm sorry, but whoever admitted you must have done so in error. We are closed now in honor of the season and will not reopen our doors until 2 days from now." The man's gaze was sweeping around the room, taking in its simple decorations. He ignored Sarah's speech. Instead, he asked, "This is a brothel. Am I correct?" "Of course it is," Sarah thought. "Why else would you be here?" Sarah restrained herself from speaking her thoughts. "We supply company and entertainment for lonely gentlemen, yes." The man gestured to Sarah's hair, which Lenny had ragged the night before and now fell in a glowing cascade down her back, reaching almost to her waist. "And you, with your crown of fire, are you the jewel of their company? Are you employed here?" His voice sounded sad. Sarah stiffened. "No. I am a greeter. I look after the women and put their guests at ease." "And that is all?" he asked. "That's quite enough," Sarah rejoined. "Your mother must be the horror then," the man murmured. "My mother is a working woman." Sarah straightened her spine and glared at the stranger. "And since you came here looking for a lady, I assume that you will not judge her." To her surprise, the man actually looked taken aback. "I meant no offense." Well then, keep a civil tongue in your head when you refer to my mother and her friends. The stranger didn't react to her words with anger. Instead, he looked at her with his head tilted, as though she fascinated him. You may not share your mother's profession now, the man said, but you will have to do so eventually, won't you? Give it 2 or 3 more years and your choice will be between that and the streets. Nymburk is a cold place to be without a fire in the winter. His comments made Sarah angrier. He wasn't wrong. That hard truth had hovered above Lenny and Sarah ever since they had come here. Right now, however, Sarah was special and protected. And she hated the stranger for reminding her that her state of grace had an expiration date. My future employment isn't your business, she said. You may be wrong about that, the man paused. Do you know who I am? I'm afraid not, Sarah said. And we really are closed for the night. It's Christmas Eve, you know. Is it? There was a low growl underneath the words. Yes, Sarah gestured to the door and stepped towards it, trying to herd the man back out into the rain. And we will be closed until the 2nd day after Christmas. We would be more than happy to welcome you then. Wait, the man said. I can't leave. Why not? Because I have something to offer you, he said. A gift. Sarah narrowed her eyes. What sort of gift? I have no need for pretty baubles, you know. I have plenty already. I believe you, the man said. I am not offering you jewelry. The gift I would give has real value, and I do not offer it lightly. If you accept it, it will take you far away from this place, from this world of pigs who disguise themselves as men, from this house of bruises and of tears. It will redefine your existence. It will make you new. Please, make yourself clear, was Sarah's only response. With my gift, you will be able to move between worlds. You will see not only other countries, but other planets, even other universes. You will tread far and wide, without restraint, and see more in 1 year than other mortals do in a lifetime. Most importantly, you will be independent. You need never fear being let down by another person again. That is what you desire, is it not? To be free, to be strong, to have knowledge and power, to only ever need to rely on myself, to see and do things beyond what the women here could ever imagine. Hell yes, that is what I want, Sarah thought. The strength of the desire that seized her then was enough to frighten Sarah, despite her shaking hands and frantically thudding heart. Or perhaps because of them. Sarah counseled herself to pause, to consider. She had known one man in her life who had promised her paradise, and he had been quick enough to snatch it away. Either the stranger had nothing to give her, or the cost for what he offered would be far beyond her ability to pay. So, despite the desperate yearning thundering through her, Sarah managed to keep calm and speak in her best approximation of an adult's voice. What specifically are you offering me, and what do you want in return? I am offering you the ability to leave your body behind, to move from it and travel through the universe, to see other places, other cities, countries, and more. You will do so in safety. In fact, death will not as much as glance sideways at you. You will not visit other worlds simply as a tourist. You'll be able to speak with their people in their own tongue. You will have access to all the knowledge of those worlds, and have the time and the license to study them at leisure. Your youth will remain and your health will always be good. You will be a woman of the world, beautiful and wise, sought after for your intellect rather than your appearance. Sarah stared at the man, 1,000 words pouring through her mind, but none of them passing her lips. Oh, really? The man threw up his hands, frustration clear in his pose. I can tell that you want the gift, but I'm not going to hang around forever and wait for you to decide. There are thousands of other little girls in places like this who will jump at the opportunity. You, my dear, are infinitely replaceable. He's going to leave. Her mind parroted. He's going to leave. He will walk away and give the gift to somebody else, And you will stay here and wind up working for Danik and never see anything beyond Nürnberg." Sarah closed her eyes and squeezed her hands into fists. "I won't be conned," she repeated to herself. "I will choose my own path and my own future, and I will do so with open eyes." "Okay, so I'm interested," Sarah answered. "And I only need one more thing to decide. Tell me how you can offer such a power." Sarah frowned. "Who are you really?" The man shrugged, the motion fluid beneath his night blue cloak. "I have many names. I have been called the Bearer of Light, the Emperor under the Hills. Most importantly, right now, I am your friend." Sarah narrowed her eyes. "And you swear to me that there is no price for the gift?" "I swear upon the foundations of the earth. I will charge you nothing." "Well, then," Sarah nodded. Yes, I want the gift. I want to walk between worlds." "Then you shall." The man reached out and touched one finger to Sarah's forehead. Then everything went black. Chapter 4. The blackness was over in a moment. The blackness lasted forever. When it faded, Sarah found herself on a road. She recognized the scenery, so it must have been somewhere near Nürnberg. But the path itself was foreign. Her body, too, felt different. It was taller, older than the body she was used to. So much so that she found walking difficult. It was bitterly cold, perhaps December or January. And the ice on the ground and in the air bit into her toes and fingers, making her stumble even more. She was afraid. She could feel her heart thundering, her breath coming in short gasps. Despite that, it took her a moment to understand that she was running away. She was running and somebody was chasing her. She was running, she realized, for her life. Had the person struck her before? Sarah wasn't sure. But one of her legs was weak and dragging behind her. Her other ankle kept turning over, nearly dropping her to the floor, so that her run had become a painful lurching trot. It was almost inevitable that a hand should close on her shoulder, spinning her around, a knife flashing forwards to trace a line over her exposed throat. Sarah felt the sharpness of the dagger, but there was no pain, only the blackness swelling forward and then a blink like a flash of lightning passing before her eyes. When it retreated again, the scene was different. She was reading in a hall full of books. It was immense, books as high and as far as could be seen, and she felt deep satisfaction to be there among them. This time she was warm and comfortable and familiar enough with her body to know she'd eaten recently. She would have happily stayed in that moment, but the lightning came again, and she was torn away. When her eyes opened, she was standing at the head of a staircase, looking down into an elegant ballroom in which dozens of rich and beautiful people were dancing. She was taller again, and this time she understood that she was older, a woman grown. She was wearing a lovely gown that fit her like a second skin, and her eyes were hidden by a delicate, lacy black mask. When she started to come down the stairs, people smiled and applauded. They beamed at her as if she was the one person in the world they'd most wanted to see. And yet there was a coldness behind their eyes, something that made Sarah shiver. When the light returned, Sarah covered her eyes. When it flowed away, she was back in the brothel, lying on her back on one of the sofas, and the stranger was looking down at her. Chapter 5. "Are you well?" the stranger asked. Sarah wiped her eyes. "No. Yes. What happened to me?" The pain in Sarah's joints would ease eventually, and she was sure that her mind would stop spinning soon. That wasn't what worried her. What worried her was the pictures she had seen. Where had they come from? Had she been dreaming, or had she gone mad? "You need not worry. You are back now. You are safe." She felt the man place a cushion underneath her head. "What did you see? Can you tell me?" Sarah coughed. Don't you know? It is different for everyone. So, Sarah thought. He has done this before. It was horrible. I was lost. Someone was chasing me. It was freezing cold and I couldn't run. I felt such pain. I couldn't see or hear, but I felt it when a dagger touched my throat, and then there was blood everywhere. Yes, the man answered. You were seeing your first death. Fear made Sarah's stomach twist. What are you talking about? What death? What do you mean first? Sarah still couldn't see the stranger's face, but she sensed a cruel smirk being leveled in her direction. You have my gift now. You will be able to leave your body and travel without it. You will cross distances that no man alive could ever compass. That part of you is immortal, but your flesh is not. Whenever you die, you will find a new body awaiting you. But the pain of death will be yours to endure every time. But I can still come and find my family, right? The man's cowled head shook from side to side. Empty flesh is not readily available. Time will pass between each death and the option to inhabit a new body. There will be dislocation, loss. A fierce ache pierced Sarah's chest. So my mother, the women here, you will lose them when you die. More than that, you will die early, and afterwards you will not see them again. Tears were pouring down Sarah's face. She made no move to wipe them away. Her rage and sorrow had paralyzed her, almost robbing her of speech. But you promised. You said. I said that I would charge you nothing for the gift, and I will not. But nothing in this world is without price. For every good thing you gain by our arrangement, something else must be sacrificed. For every new world you see, you will lose an old friend. That is the cost of the gift. Take it back, Sarah said. I can't, the stranger said. It's too late. You accepted the gift and you cannot cast it away. The gift is yours, and even your one true love will be swept away by its fire. That was when Sarah lost the last of her composure. I hate you, Sarah screamed. You are the devil. Perhaps. If anything, the man's voice grew milder as Sarah's sobs increased in volume. Perhaps I am. One day, when we meet again, you will be able to test the truth of that. About to combust in fury, but also a breath away from tears. Sarah searched around her for something to do to express her rage. Was it accident or fate that caused her gaze to drop on the simple wooden rosary one of her mother's colleagues had given her for her birthday last year? Without hesitation, she lifted it and cast it in the stranger's direction. Sarah had not been sure if the rosary would have any effect. But a moment later there was a huge rumble and clap as if of thunder. Then a sound of screams and galloping hooves. And a sudden cold that almost froze the breath in Sarah's lungs. Then, just as quickly, the room was as it had been. The front door was locked and the winter rain was pattering down outside. Chapter 6. Time must have stopped that evening. Sarah felt that she mourned for hours, but her mother and the other women never descended the stairs. She was sure that no girl had ever felt such misery, and that no human had ever made such a dreadful mistake as she. She cried until she had no tears, until she could only shiver and cough and clutch herself. Perhaps, eventually someone heard her. Maybe some kindly angel, on its way to sing a Christmas hymn over the site of Christ's birth in Bethlehem, heard Sarah's cries and took pity on her. Whatever the cause, there came a moment when her anguish eased, and something warm and comforting replaced it. A sense like a hand being placed on her shoulder. Words occurred to Sarah, words that were, perhaps, too complex to have risen from the mind of a child who had yet to mark her 10th year. Yet rise they did, and they stilled Sarah's sobs. While we dwell in flesh, there will always be some sadness, some loss. It is part of being human. The best defense against its pain is to adore those you love with all of your heart and might and soul. That way, even when you are far from one another, they are not really gone. You hold them in memory, and there they will live until you meet them again in eternity. Chapter 7. Almost as soon as Sarah's eyes dried, her mother and the other women descended the stairs, laughing and teasing, as if only moments had passed since they had ascended them. To her amazement, Sarah found that she could smile and laugh along with them. The women exchanged presents. Sarah's gift was a silver cross that used to be her mother's. The meal that night was the best Sarah remembered since her days in Eden. Perhaps better, because the events of the evening had increased her appreciation of them. More importantly, Lenny sat beside Sarah, laughing merrily, looking as happy and beautiful as Sarah had ever seen her. Yes, Sarah felt the spectral pain of coming loss, the shadow of approaching grief. But she shook her head and focused on the moment and her present happiness. Sarah, who would later come to call herself Seraphina again, would indeed live a long time, and she would both gain and lose much. In the end, one of her greatest lessons would remain the one she'd learned at the age of 9, that the best armor against the anguish of loss is the shield of memory, a shield that grows stronger with every happy, loving moment shared. So the greatest gift given that Christmas was not the secret one that would forever alter Seraphina's life, but the simple kindness and merriment among those who, though poor in their purses, managed yet to be happy and loving in their hearts. Subscribe to become a delicious darling. Well, there we have it, my wonderful friends. I hope you enjoyed our special anniversary story. Did you recognize the main character? I thought that you might. Yes, when I was a girl, many people called me Sarah. And yes, I have died more than once, but my soul continues to exist. Each time I awaken a new body, a new time, and a new life, apart from my first. I think that this life is my favorite, because I have such wonderful friends to spend my time with. If you enjoyed today's episode, please type the word magic in the comments. Then tell me about your most magical experience. As always, I would love it if you would click subscribe or follow and tap the notification button. That way, you will become an official delicious darling and will be notified of all future episodes. Please come back next week for the very first episode of Season 2, when we will return to the scary but thrilling world of Halloween poems. For now, I'm going to take the evening to relax with my memories. Have a lovely evening and a wonderful week, and sleep well, my delicious darlings.